Hey everyone, welcome welcome to my live stream. So I thought I'd answer a question that I got, which was how would what would you advice would you give to someone who's looking for an internship who maybe is a first year or just starting off their career? So this is not sponsored by the official startup drink. Let's go through some of the questions or some of the answers that I've been told and talk about some of those, which I think are really good. And then maybe I'll give some other ideas. So, yeah, again, the question is I'm a student and I want to get a job this summer, and so this summer is like, right now it's November, but probably time to start looking. How do I get a job for this summer? So I asked some people in my network, and I'm going to go through their questions and then probably put some commentary or spin on what they said. So one response I got was from Kenneth Cassell, who said, "You don't have to have permission to build cool things. Don't wait to get started learning whatever interests you." And I like that. I think that's great advice to start building cool things. I think for some people that's easy. For a lot of people who are just starting out, that can be a little difficult because they don't know what's cool, or they don't want they don't even, they're just learning the basics here, so they don't know what to build. And so I'd like to have maybe a little bit more concrete advice for someone. I think another thing that advice that someone's going to get is like, what do you want to focus on? And I get that. The last time I was interviewed for a job, well, I don't think the last time, but one of those times I was interviewed, multiple times I've been interviewed for a job and I've had the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I think that's a horrible question. Like, especially if I'm working for a startup, it's like, retired, because this startup's going to go to the moon. But I don't think that people who are starting out know necessarily what they want to do. They're like, hey, computer science seems interesting, so maybe I should study that. So, what is a project that a first year student can blog? Um, and uh, Ideally, that blog would not just be like going up and signing up for Medium, but it would be a blog that you hosted either through leveraging something like GitHub and Netlify. Why is that? Well, I think you're going to learn some things when you do that rather than just like writing text. Not that writing text is bad. So, I think writing text is awesome. But I think that there's valuable experience from understanding like how to use GitHub, how to use Netlify, and they're not super hard, but there's also the experience of like writing HTML and putting your own CSS on it, which are skills that I think are useful for almost everyone who's going to be touching software, but also they give you some chance to sort of experiment, a little bit of what front end engineers do, and also deployment, and understand how those things work. So, yeah, if you're going to build something and you don't know what to build because, you just don't have much experience, I would say write a blog. Now, on that, like, what should you write a blog about? It's a good question. I would just start dumping my thoughts on like my classes. And maybe, you can name your blog something cute like Reflections of a First Year CS Student or something like that. But, you might just have simple journal entries like, today we learned about classes and blah, blah, blah. And here's a simple class. And we learned about how to do this in C++. And maybe if you know another language, you could like compare and contrast those two. So I think there is utility in that. A lot of people aren't going to read your blog if they're experienced with that, but I think people who are just starting out, that can be super useful to see a path of someone who's learning these things. I would think that if someone started blogging from the start of their CS career and just sort of like talked about what they learned and their thoughts about it, that at the end of their 4 years, they'd be getting a lot of blog traffic and probably could leverage that. Okay, so that's my idea on that. So I asked Kenneth to sort of follow up on that, like what he would do, and his response was, back in my first year of college, I joined a programming club, and it really opened my eyes to what was possible. Start building web applications with their help and guidance. Started building web applications, learned a ton hanging out with people. And I agree with the building. I think building things is awesome. Like I have a degree from Stanford, and I would say that I learned the most in my college years in my senior project class when we built something, basically a web application from scratch. Because I had to learn about how to actually deploy databases and how to create web servers and certificates and link those all up. And that wasn't something that was taught in class. So yeah, I think building is useful, but in the name of starting simple, I would say start off with a blog, and I'd be more specific. I'd say like look to deploy a blog on GitHub using something like Netlify. Okay, Trevor says build cool stuff outside of class. Yeah, I think that's a great comment, Trevor. Yeah, building cool stuff outside of class is good, and I think this is advice that I give in general to people after, they've been in like a Python class or a machine learning class and are like, where do I go now? And my advice is generally find something that you like and see if you can apply it. So it might be, if someone's just learned about machine learning or pandas, then I say like, rather than using Excel, which is probably what you're using right now, use Python, right? And so that's a project where you can force yourself to do it. So I think that holds true for a lot of things, right? That learning through doing is a great thing. Now, I think learning, I'm not, so again, I do, I sell training, so I'm not sold on that learning by doing is the one true way to learn. I actually think that like having someone to mentor you and guide you is a more effective way, but barring that, doing it is, I think, important. Okay, next comment here. Douglas said, I would reply that I don't know of internships for students until they're juniors. Maybe. Depends on your company, right? I don't think that's necessarily the case per se. Kenneth responded to that Facebook and Google hire freshmen and sophomore engineers or interns. And I know companies that hire high school kids as interns. So if someone's thinking that, I'm too young to get an internship, I would change your mindset. I think I would say this, like an internship, if you get an internship, that's your best bet at getting a job, because I would say a good chunk of internships land in jobs. Just my experience from being an intern, getting a job from being an intern, hiring people as interns, giving people who are interns jobs, and similarly in my network. So I think an internship is a great way. It's also a great way to know like what you don't want to do, to the point of like people saying, what do you want to do or what do you want to focus on? Like I said, I don't think a first year knows. A lot of people don't know what they want to do, but having an internship gives you experience, like opening your eyes, like, oh, this is like real world. This is not the academic stuff that we learn, but this is what's going on in the real world. Okay, the next comment here. Okay, so I guess Doug further clarified. He says sometimes further schooling is needed before an internship. Yeah, for medicine, something like that, that's the case. I would say for computer science, yeah, generally you do want some programming skills, right? But it's possible. I would say also this, like, don't. So one type of programming job or tech job that you could get is like customer support or QA, quality assurance, where they're not necessarily requiring programming, but you're going to get experiencing how tech works, right? That there needs to be support there. And if you're delivering the software that needs support, or you're delivering the software that needs to be tested, you're going to have your eyes open to, what goes on the other side, and maybe, have some compassion or understanding about what's going on there. Okay, the next comment here was from Colin. Colin said, learn how to network, not the digital kind, the analog kind that requires you to talk to people. Filling out internship forms online will get you one step closer to nowhere. I actually like this comment, Colin. Thanks for sharing that. And I would say that if I have one regret from my college time, and even after my college time, it's be that I really squandered my networking experiences. I was more of the opinion that, like, hey, I'm at a good college, I have decent grades, so I should get a good internship. And as much as we might want that to be the case, that's just really not how the world works. And I think I've since repented of that and tried to network more and also help out people who are looking for networking experiences. But yeah, I totally agree with that. I would say that networking is super important. I would say it's probably the most important skill for getting a job. So I guess the question comes down to how does someone who's like a first year even network, right? How do you do that? And I guess this could be its own little LinkedIn Live on its own, but let me just give you some ideas for networking, which admittedly I did not do, and I wish I did do, but I've hence seen these sort of techniques used and used them myself. And the first one is to realize the nature of people, and that people like to talk about themselves. Even like introverted people like to talk about themselves. And so, if you're like, well, I want to do computer science because I don't want to talk and I don't know how to approach people or that sort of thing. You can do that. I just think your career is going to be less maybe fulfilling, or you probably won't get as much out of it as you would otherwise. So if you can just sort of spin that and say, look, you might feel like, oh, this is like slimy or whatever, or insecure asking someone for a job. And I'm not saying you need to necessarily ask them for a job, although I don't think that that's necessarily bad. But I think going up and saying to someone, hey, do you have advice for me? What advice would you give me? People, that's the kind of question, like, people are like, yeah, I have advice, and they want to give it. Now, I guess the other thing is who to ask that to. So if you're a first year student, one would be your professors. I think generally professors, the only sorts of questions they deal with are like, how do I do the assignment or whatnot? But I think you should view your professors as a resource. And ideally, they have some connections to the local environment at large, or companies, or even, I think another opportunity for an internship can be, on campus, on a college campus itself. And it doesn't have to be necessarily during the summer per se. It can be, while you're going to school. So I wouldn't overlook networking with your professors. And admittedly, like I said, I did that horribly when I was in college. I had my advisor who I networked with, and I don't think I leveraged that relationship as much as I could have. And then just colleagues who I was in classes with, I don't think I leveraged those as much as I could have either. So on that note, colleagues in classes, right? Network with them. Sometimes, admittedly at the start, this is kind of hard, but like, I would say networking with a TA in one of your classes, like just generally your TAs are going to have more experience. So network with them. And So, I mean, networking is sort of a vague term. Let me be more concrete about that. I would say get a LinkedIn account and start connecting with people on LinkedIn, just so you have a list of people. Obviously, you can network and just talk to people, but having a list of people that you can reach out to is great. Okay, so that's networking sort of at the school. How do you network beyond that, which is probably, I would say, more important? And I mean, to Colin's point and to the previous point by Kenneth, like some sort of club, right? And so I'm heavily involved in the Python community, and obviously, like right now, it's a little bit different. But previous to COVID times that we live in, I would say that very close to most universities that I know, there was some sort of computer club, if not a Python programming club, right, or user group. And so going to those as students is great. And then again, just going up and talking to people and say, hey, I'm a student. What advice will you give me? Oftentimes at these sorts of events, there are people who are looking to hire, and oftentimes these people like to hire interns. So put yourself out there. I realize that like that can be super uncomfortable for some people, but again, I think this is really key. So thanks for that. Colin also says, don't feel like you can't apply for an internship because you think you don't know anything or come out from the most well-known school. You know more than you think, and employers don't expect a ton out of undergrads anyway. Yeah, I think good point. Okay, Zach says, use your university or college career services center as a resource. They're there to help you. Yeah, I think so. I didn't use those in college. I mean, they might be good. I'm just sort of skeptical. Like, I don't know. I have like a skeptic hat of like, obviously they're there to like help people get jobs or whatever, but I think they're more there to like facilitate companies coming for like hiring or whatnot. So I would be more apt to try and network directly with companies and people who work at companies rather than to sort of sidestep that through these places. Not to say they can't have useful things or help. I mean, they can help you, but you need to get a foot in the door somewhere. Zach also says, don't be afraid to take an internship in something that isn't your dream job. Yeah, like I said, like QA, and not to say like QA is bad per se. I mean, my first internship was in QA, and I knew that I didn't want to do QA, but I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. They're giving me an internship. They're paying me decent. Let's do that, right? So QA, support, I think doing those are better than having experience maybe outside of what you want. I mean, obviously, like you can go do like Peace Corps or some other thing that can, I think, provide experience. But, you know, I think being able to see tech from a different side can be useful. Zach also says, if you get interviews but don't land an internship, that's okay. Yeah, I think this is a great point as well, Zach, in that, I mean, especially with these FANG companies, so that's like your Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, which are well known for rejecting good candidates because they don't want to, they'd rather like reject a bunch of good candidates than to hire someone who they thought was good but isn't good. So they're trying to reject the false positive rather than optimizing for hiring good people per se. Well, that's their method of optimizing. And so, you know, there are a lot of candidates that get rejected, and you just have to realize that, I mean, it's also possible that you could interview sometime and have like a bad interview or whatever. And so just deal with that. I also think that interviewing in and of itself is a good experience. And I think that you should interview for something, even if you're not qualified, just for the experience of the interview. I know someone who said that they like to interview once every 6 months just to practice interviewing. And I mean, that might be stretching a little bit, but the interviewing skill, I don't think that there's really a class in the university that I experienced that prepares you for interviewing. I mean, I had a really weird interview one time with IBM where I went into an interview there, and I mean, I think I don't have a PhD, but I think it was like basically what PhD people do to when they're, presenting their thesis. They get a bunch of people and they like grill them, and that's what it was like. It was like all these people with PhDs who had been working at IBM for like 30 years sat around and like asked me these really hard questions. I'm like, I don't know, I've got like 2 years of experience studying, right? And so, yeah, just be aware that like interviews can be building blocks, and I would say don't be super upset if you don't land an internship. Okay, next comment here is from Chad. Chad says, it's tough. First year internships are really hard because they haven't really made it into major classes. I would say that they should look for any job that lets them interact with the type of people they want to become. Yeah, and I think that sort of relates to these points we've said before. Like, it doesn't have to be your ideal job or your dream job necessarily, but it gets you some experience. Matthew says, contact interesting medium-sized companies that don't have internships and tell them why they should. Worked for me. Yeah, I think that can work, right? If you can make a pitch, right? And again, this comes down to the networking here. And I think that I think that like I would say that you spamming a bunch of people with email or whatnot and telling them that they should hire you is probably not going to be effective per se. But if you can network with them at some other level, right? And again, admittedly, this is somewhat hard here, but I think through the Meetup avenue, I think you can sort of do that through LinkedIn if you start interacting with people. I mean, on that point, I think this point is interesting, Matthew. Maybe I'll like riff on it a little bit in that I would say that find interesting, and they don't have to necessarily be medium, but I think what Matthew's saying is that medium-sized companies might not be looking for internships, whereas large companies are looking for internships. So maybe, that's a back way in there. But I would say that following interesting companies that are local or that you're interested in working at, either on LinkedIn or maybe on Twitter, and then following people on there and just start interacting with them. So building up a rapport of interacting. I think that's kind of where networking is moving to nowadays. I think hopefully when the vaccines come out that we'll get back to some sort of normalcy. But I do think you need to have some sort of way to do digital networking, right? And I don't think that spamming someone on LinkedIn and saying, hire me as an internship is the most effective way. I would think, to me, more effective would be like, hey, dropping a personal note to someone on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm a first-year student and I'm interested in connecting with people in the industry, and then maybe send them, rather than say, hire me, might phrase it this way, like, what advice would you give someone like me who's looking for an internship? I think that might be more useful, but maybe the direct route would work too. Vi says, start coding challenges now. Consider joining your school's competitive programming club. I think this is a great point Vi makes here, to do programming challenges, especially if you're considering like the Facebook, Google, Amazon, these FANG companies, because they're notorious for having coding challenges. And I mean, also some of these medium companies or startups that model themselves after that will have coding challenges as well. So I think that's a useful skill. Again, this is not a skill that's taught in school per se. So considering those, or if there is some sort of programming club, I wasn't aware of that when I was in school, but admittedly things have changed since then. Okay. Avery says, do personal projects. Again, I think that this has been talked about. Yep, do personal projects. If you don't know what to do, start off with a blog. I will say that, like my senior project, like I said, I learned the most from that, and I was able to leverage that, like that IBM interview I was talking about was all leveraged from my senior project. There was a lot of good stuff that I was able to leverage from my senior project, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a senior project, but if you're motivated to make a project on the side, then that can be useful. Okay, the next one is from Nick. Nick Bear says, have a portfolio. The number one predictor of whether you can do something is whether you have done it well. Yeah, I think this is the same portfolio project, but you've got to start somewhere. Cindy says, okay, I'm not quite sure what Cindy's saying, so I'm going to leave it at that. Anyway, these are a couple ideas to get an internship. I'm going to summarize this with my key takeaways. My key takeaway is, first of all, you probably want to be on LinkedIn, so get on LinkedIn and then start networking with people. So who to network with: local companies, local HR people who are hiring, smart people at your school. So that could be professors, that could be your classmates, that could be classmates who are your TAs or whatnot. Start building that network that way. And then some sort of project, right? That's been a common theme here. And if you don't have a project or something that you can point to as something that you've done, and it can be stuff that you've done in class, and a lot of people do point to projects in class. I would say, in addition to having projects, I think having a blog is super useful, in that writing is useful, but it also, I think, is just one like nice little badge that you can have that a lot of people don't have. So hopefully this was useful. Thanks for listening. Let me know your comments or thoughts, and I'd love to hear your advice on getting an internship. Okay, stay safe, everyone. Bye.